This is a walkthrough tour of our 1981 CHB trawler, which was built in Taiwan. There's a lot of different brand names for the same hull design that different importers and boat brokers used when ordering these boats from the various yards in Taiwan. So this layout is single engine. In that era, the single engine setups were typically the Ford Lehman 120 horsepower naturally aspirated diesel engine. It's a 6-cylinder. And I'll just run through the systems that supply the engine and show you their locations, starting with the raw water, and then the fuel supply, the exhaust side, the air intake, the alternator and electrical system, and then the closed loop freshwater coolant. So I've been on a few different variations on this boat, and the location of equipment varies a little bit. But in my case, the raw water intake through hull is located, we're looking aft right now, starboard side. So there's the seacock that's below the water line that brings salt water into the engine. You can see I've got the valve closed right now. I label the month and date of every hose and expendable component in the engine room. So at a quick glance, I have an idea of the age of things and whether or not they need to be replaced. As I swap out hose clamps, I'm switching to the non-perforated style. The ones I like that I can get locally here in the marina are the ABA manufacturer. They're expensive, but they're a marine grade stainless. I don't have any corrosion issues. They come highly recommended. My first couple of months of ownership of the boat, I was using inexpensive hose clamps and quickly learned that was not a good idea. So 180 pivot, I'm now looking forward. So the water comes in through the raw water seacock into a sea strainer. I clean this as needed. After raw water filters through the sea strainer, it continues via suction up to the raw water pump that's attached to the front side of the engine. It's engine driven. And you can see here I've labeled with a paint pen on the pump the date and hours when the pump was installed. And I have a sticker indicating the install date of the impeller. And then the hours are the recommended replacement hour. And when I installed this pump, I was still learning about the gasket maker, blue material, and neglected to clean up all of the squeeze out. So now I have a mess down there for the next person. Quick comment on my raw water hoses. These are a heater hose. I bought them in a marine chandlery. I had the mechanic at the yard look at these two to make sure they're adequate for what I'm doing. They said they're all right. I've had some comments online that I should be using a stiffer hose with a thicker wire frame to it to prevent the suction from the pump causing the hose to squeeze and restrict water flow. I haven't had any problems. Mechanic signed off. So I'm going to leave these until they're time to be replaced. But I will replace them with the stiffer hose when the time comes. And you can see here I had a little chafe risk with this oil cooler hose, so I added an outer diameter extra layer of hose just as chafe protection. So continuing on, after the raw water pump, the raw water flows into the first oil cooler. And this one is the engine oil cooler, and again I dated in hours of install date. Hose clamps, you can see here actually I need to reverse one of these. It should be alternating the set screws, so and rotate it maybe 45 degrees, because you can see when the set screws are right next to each other it actually angles the clamp. So I should replace these. And then on the underside of the oil cooler you can see the connection to the engine block, where hot engine oil, and actually I don't know if that's the hot side or the cooled side, emerging here, and the other one's below. So you got hot oil coming out of the engine. It gets cooled through the saltwater heat exchanger and puts cool oil back into the engine block. The raw water flow continues along to the next heat exchanger, which is mounted on the aft end of the engine. It's this large cylinder. I have not replaced that in the 4 years we've been running the boat. That larger heat exchanger circulates the engine freshwater coolant to cool with raw seawater. On this engine there's one zinc and it's located on the water coolant heat exchanger. The raw water continues out of the freshwater cooler into the transmission oil cooler, which is an identical setup to the engine oil cooler. I replaced these hoses. American Diesel recommends a larger diameter than the factory original hoses. So in this case I installed these about a year ago. And I installed the oil cooler in 2014. And you can see once again I have some hose clamps that should be inverted. This engine is fitted with a Borg Werner Velvet Drive transmission. I maintain an engine log and I've got the coolant replacement date noted in the log. After the raw water exits the transmission oil cooler, it enters the exhaust mix elbow. This is where the hot exhaust gases emerge from the engine exhaust manifold and mix with the raw water. That combined mix of gas and raw water travel through an exhaust hose and out the transom of the boat. This exhaust system was replaced in, I believe it was 2012. It's before I bought the boat. I do have the paperwork on it and I've just been keeping an eye on the hose. The elbow was replaced in, I believe it was the fourth quarter of 2013. This is due for replacement again. They have a tendency to corrode on the inside bottom from the mixture of corrosive salt water and hot exhaust gas. I've never had one fail, but from what I understand, when they go, you start to get exhaust gas exiting along with salt water into your engine room. Moving along to the port side of the engine, you have the relay starter solenoid. This one's new this year. And then here is the starter motor solenoid and the engine start motor. And I just replaced, you can watch in a previous video, but these are brand new battery cables. Moving on to the forward port side of the engine is a freshly rebuilt alternator. It's a charging system for the boat. You can check out some of my electrical system update videos, which are still a work in progress. Behind the alternator, connected to the engine block, is a coolant hose that circulates coolant to the boat's freshwater heater, which is located in the engine room forward starboard side. This is a unit that can heat water either via 110 volt AC power or from the heat exchange of recirculated engine coolant. And the original configuration on this boat was using copper water lines. I have a video on replacing those copper lines with the heater hose. You gotta reconfigure floorboards a bit to get to the rest of the engine. So backing up to the starboard side, aft end, got a pillow down there to kneel on. But the fuel system, this boat has two fuel tanks, midships, port and starboard. You can see through the sight hole there, that's the access port for the fuel gauge, which is not currently functioning. And I think I can confidently say I have never been on a boat that has a properly operating fuel gauge. So in this configuration, fuel picks up from the starboard tank, and then there is a balancing line at the aft end of the two tanks with valves to keep the tanks equalized. We run with the valve open at all times, and we carry 150 gallons per side, 300 total. So you can see the Raycore, the larger one, it's a Raycore, I believe it's an 800. It's a primary engine, or first line of filtration, and then the smaller Raycore to the left is for the genset. I would like to install a Raycore fuel pressure gauge on the top cover so I can at a quick glance get an idea as to the state of the filter that's in there and whether or not it needs to be changed out. So fuel travels out of the primary Raycore filter through the copper line. You can see the valve is currently closed. And that copper line converts to a rubber fuel line and finds its way into the secondary engine-mounted CAV filters. These are a bit of a nuisance to swap out. And in the first 4 seasons, I only changed them out one time. I figure the Raycore is doing all the work. And jumping back to the Raycore, I'm running the same as the previous owner. I just followed their guidance, but 8 a 2-micron filter, which is the smallest filter for a Raycor. The Lehman circulates so little fuel that I haven't had any early clogging issues by running a 2-micron. I believe these CAV filters only get it down to about 7 to 10 microns. So in my case, it's a little unconventional, but my primary filter is a finer filtration than the engine-mounted secondaries. And with that plan, I hope to not have to change these out too frequently. Just realized I skipped a step in the process. Between the primary and secondary filters, there's an engine-mounted fuel lift pump. And on the right-hand side, it's got a little spring-loaded lever to prime the engine, secondary filters, and injector pump when needed. I've got a video on changing this thing out at sea when the previous one failed while underway. You can check that out. So again, the fuel travels from the lift pump to the 2 secondary filters, exits the secondary filters, and finds its way up to the Sims injector pump. This is a mechanically engine-controlled fuel injector pump, and the high-pressure fuel comes out of these 6 tubes to feed each individual cylinder along the engine, number 6 being the aftmost cylinder and the longest fuel run. And then looking at the valve cover here, there's an air crankcase breather hose that terminates at the air intake filter, which is port side. Mine's got some dog hair on it. We run in a low dust marine environment, so I've actually never cleaned that filter. I'll just visually inspect it for any problems. And it stays fairly oily at all times from the breather hose. I gotta be careful if I'm down there with pants on, and I don't want to accidentally brush against that filter. Moving up to the front side of the engine, we've got the coolant reserve tank. So I'm gonna get this open. This is where you check your coolant level. I'm in pretty good shape. I could put another little drop in there. And then on the exhaust manifold is the bleeder valve. Whenever you change out the coolant, you need to open this valve to breathe and let any air out of the system. If you leave it closed, you'll get air pockets, and then you'll be low on coolant once the air pushes back up to the tank. And then forward of that is a plastic coolant reserve overflow tank that prevents any overfilling from spilling into the bilge. Tighten this now so I don't forget later. Also here on the rocker cover is the oil fill cap. Fresh oil goes in there. On this configuration, the dipstick is located on the block behind the alternator port side. All right, I'm going to shuffle around some floorboards and we'll look at the front of the engine. In an upcoming video, you'll see my electrical panel updates. I'm at the disassembly stage right now. Removed components. So because everything's disconnected, I don't have any DC power on the boat right now. So the engine room's a little dark with the floor panels reinstalled. But I've got enough space to showcase the front of the engine. So you can see here, this is just forward of the engine. I get a little access hatch. This is where I can pop my head in while we're underway. Let's see, when I'm standing up, I'm 5'11", and the floorboards are about chest height. Let's see here. Looking at the front side of the engine, there's a single V-belt that drives the alternator and the freshwater pump. And same as my other components, I keep the date and engine hours on the belts. On this engine design, the belt is threaded behind the freshwater coolant hoses. So it's a good idea when you swap out the belt to also pre-thread a spare. So if you have a belt failure underway, it's a quick install. And like most engines, the tension of the belt is controlled by the alternator position. This is the front side of the raw water pump location. So the raw water pump is driven internally by a set of meshed gears, but the freshwater pump is the belt drive. You can see here this engine's set up with a second pulley, so it's already configured if I wanted to install a second alternator to have dedicated alternators for the house and battery banks. Forward at starboard side is the battery box that contains the engine start batteries. In my case, I'm running two 6-volt golf cart batteries. And port forward are the two boxes that contain the house batteries. And there's a quick walkthrough of my engine room and main engine. In a future video, maybe I'll go over the generator install, if that's something people are interested in seeing, how that's configured and how it cools. It's basically a smaller version of the main engine in terms of cooling, power, airflow, fuel access. Let me know what else you'd like to see in the comments below, and if you have any ideas for some future video clips. I'm always looking for ideas and things to do while we're out here playing on the boat. Thanks for watching.